Welcome Wargamers, and in today's video we're going to wrap up our exploration of the Ogre Maw tribes by talking about the Gutbuster portion of the army. Remember, there are two distinct cultures within greater ogredom, I guess we could say, and that is the Beastclaw Raiders and the Gutbusters. And I have to say, I was so excited for this portion of the book because these are units that have barely been mentioned in Age of Sigmar books thus far, and now they're kind of getting added into a greater army. And keep in mind that Wargluts, right, which is the main military structure of Gutbusters, can still include many Beastclaw Raider units from competing tribes that they've run into and conquered. In addition, the units we're going to talk about, again, I just want to emphasize, represent the military portion of the civilization. There's still ogres back at home at the camp. This is just, again, the Wargluts. And with all that out of the way, let's jump into the individual lore of these units with a reminder that, of course, not every unit has the same amount of lore. And I've gotten some feedback from people wishing that I posted pictures of the units, like the actual models, as I talk about them, so we'll try it in this video. Let me know what you think. Starting off with the top of this meat mountain, right? The Tyrant is the rotund and terrifying leader of any Warglut, second only to the Over-Tyrant, who governs multiple Wargluts, but for the book Maw tribes, we don't see that level of hero, at least on the table. I made the analogy earlier of a Maw tribe being a ship, right? The Tyrant is the captain. He is solely responsible for making sure the Warglut is constantly on the move, always finding food and resources to bring back to the tribe. All ogres operate under a very simple, societal structure, and that is might makes right. The biggest ogre with the deepest appetite and biggest belt size reigns supreme. Tyrants need to be cunning, blunt, and aggressive if they hope to basically take leadership but also survive it, because they are often the target of challenges for supremacy, having to maintain their authority constantly. When another ogre wants to challenge for the role of tyrant, it can manifest in a few ways. It could be something like an eating contest, or an outright fight to the death. The winner, of course, eating up the carcass of the loser. Now, over the course of their long lifespans, tyrants frequently take on titles. These are like surnames denoting incredible acts of war or gluttony that they've had in their lives. And while some of these names can change over time and become very numerous, the real point is to denote some aspect of that tyrant's character or abilities. So talking about the Age of Sigmar game just for a bit, this is the lore behind choosing your tyrant's big name, and it's a really great addition. It's a way to kind of boast, in a society that doesn't really respect arrogance. You have to back up everything you do with your ability to hunt, ability to provide, and this is the closest thing you can get to bragging rights, I suppose. Now, alongside the Tyrant, you'll often see him surrounded by Iron Guts, and this forms his Gut Guard, an elite unit of bodyguards that defend and fight alongside the Tyrant. Now, keep in mind, this isn't like an honor guard where it's about honor per se, right? They aren't so proud of their Tyrant that they want to defend his honor, right? He's the boss, and in battle, you do what he says. And as an added bonus, you know that the Tyrant is going to fight in the thickest, which means more food and more spoils for you. So it's kind of a mutual arrangement, right? You get your biggest and best soldiers to keep you alive, and in exchange, you lead them to the best parts where the best food is, and they get to indulge. Each Iron Gut is handpicked by their Tyrant, ogres of exceptional strength and girth and belt size that have fought for many decades. They're clad in heavy armor built from the scrap of many battles and civilizations, and they really act as the hammer of an army. Keep in mind, however, a Tyrant knows that his Gut Guard wants him dead, right? Since these are the biggest and baddest ogres, they are kind of naturally the ones who will stand against him for leadership, right? It's sort of a keep your friends close and your enemies closer kind of thing, where now the biggest and best ogres who would challenge him for supremacy are right next to him, and he gets to know more about them than anybody else. And that might seem dumb, right, to keep the people who are going to usurp you super close, but remember, it's all about food, right? A concentration of might like this can rock an entire enemy battle line. So everyone works together in the heat of battle, and the boasting and the demonstrations of might and, the usurping and that kind of stuff, it's all saved for later. So the Tyrant and his Gut Guard represent the military might of a warglut, but it's the Butchers, which is our next team we're going to talk about, that dominate the spiritual aspects. You see, from an early age, an ogre is taken aside to become a butcher one day, and some say they're chosen by Gorka Morka, others say it's just this natural skill that's seen and observed, but all of them are destined for a very terrifying life. Butchers act as the shamans, the wise men and the prophets of the wargluts. They're using the remains of their prey to scry these portents and messages from Gorka Morka. These messages are about the direction where they should head for more food and point the hunger of a god upon the realms. They are also masters of what's called gastromancy, which is the disgusting arcane power of the ogre Maw tribes. Channeling dark blood magic mixed with the gore of their food, they can unleash these devastating spells and rites up on the battlefield, invigorating ogres with this unnatural energy and that kind of stuff, and cursing their enemies to becoming the next meal. Now, on a practical level, they are also the cooks, right? Hence the name, they are the butchers. But in a society where everything, including religion, is about food, the one who prepares the feasts is like the holy man, right? He brings the religion about. Now, piggybacking off of that is the Slaughtermaster. And this is basically the top dog of the butchers, right? Think of him as the high prophet of a given Maw tribe. He prepares the biggest celebratory feasts, he's assisting the Tyrant in the most important decision-making, and having access to the most horrifying magics within the tribe. They are just masters of their grisly craft, the most professional that an ogre can be. And the most, I guess you could say, the closest thing to a holy priest that they could possibly muster rolled into one. Now, that accounts for most of the leadership within a warglut, so let's tackle some of their units in a little bit more depth. So, like I said, not a lot of lore here per unit, but they kind of come together to form a really cool story. First up are the Knoblars, right? When it comes to infantry, let's start at the bottom, and it doesn't get more small and basic than the Knoblars. These are the cousins distantly related to the Gloomspite Gits, and their society has evolved in a very different way from their cousins. Originating from the realm of metal, at the very famous Scrappa Spill, the Gits that would become the Knoblars one day were in paradise, right? They were Gits that were prone to inventing things, using scraps and raw materials to construct these crude but somewhat complex gadgets, weapons, etc., while the rest of their kind evolved to be more subterranean, like the Gloomspite Gits, right? However, these Gits, the ones who liked building things, loved being outside and doing so, searching for scrap. But there's one problem with this, we'll say, alternative lifestyle to the Gloomspite Gits, and that is orcs. The natural big bully and the bane of the Gits. Several little Waws had taken their toll on these Gits, and they became absolutely fed up with all of these orcs. Their solution to survive was to find someone even bigger than the orc to mess with them. So they approached a local Maw tribe with a proposal. Don't eat us unless you're in dire need of food. In exchange, we will work for you and serve you. And thus, what we now know as the Knoblars were born. And the ogres found this deal totally cool because they didn't care much for Knoblar meat regardless, and this way they had a group of servants who suited them well. Fetching things, preparing meals, pitching tents. In addition to that, the Knoblars are also happy to fight with their new overlords and continue to build their crude inventions and use for war. So kind of like a little symbiotic relationship, which is pretty uncommon in the mortal realms. And I'll touch on one of those inventions now, and that is the scrap launcher. I figured I would just do this to keep all the Knoblar stuff together in the same place. But this is a war machine that looks like it is constantly on the brink of collapsing into a pile of rubble. It is poorly designed, poorly crafted, and crewed by a hollering bunch of tiny little maniacs, the Knoblars, firing projectiles of anything that isn't nailed down. They don't really have artillery pieces or anything like that, they just chuck whatever they can find. And they fire these projectiles in a way that doesn't really focus on accuracy, but littering the battlefield and enemy with dangerous scrap to frighten and scare up the enemy. And the idea here, basically, is that imagine this wall of sweaty, nasty ogres are coming at you, just hollering. It looks like just a wall of beef. At the same time, you have to keep your head low and shield your basically your top half, because all these shards of metal and rock are hailing you from the sky. So it's like a 1-2 punch kind of thing. You just feel like there's no escape. And so with the little guys out of the way, let's talk about the basic ogres again, right? The gluttons are the most basic unit of the war glut. They are fat, sweaty, perpetually hungry. The gluttons charge into battle. They wield whatever blunt object or hunk of scrap they can find, and the sheer force behind their swings is enough to turn just about anything into a weapon. And this is in addition to their mouths, because mid-battle, they'll pick up and take a bite out of anything they are fighting, which is disgusting and terrifying. To think that a free guild soldier makes a great mid-battle snack. And honestly, that's really it for this unit, right? They're kind of the blueprint for all ogre kind, and that's stuff we've all covered at the beginning of this series, where when we talk about ogres, like, this is really just like the most basic of the basic. This is how they conduct themselves, and anything from this is kind of like an ogre glutton plus blank. Because everything we talked about before really embodies them, right? They're fat, they're mean, every part of their worldview, like their religion and government, is shaped by the needs and the pursuit of food. Now, next up are the lead belchers, sort of like a natural evolution of the ogre glutton, but the devastating power of ogres doesn't end with clubs and scrap. The lead belchers are a terrifying ranged element of this faction. See, ogres love loud noises and the deep rumble of cannons, but they only loosely know how to construct them. Instead, after the Maw tribe hears the roar of cannons from far away, they'll actually head straight for that battle. And no matter how that fight's going, they're going to attack the defenders, steal the cannons as spoil. So, like, eventually, picture a free guild fort, right? Just getting rocked by a Maw tribe. And while a lot of ogres are going to eat the remnants and survivors, some run up to the walls and rip off the cannons. Then, the Knoblars are set to the task of finding out how to make gunpowder. Again, their craftiness comes in super handy for this little symbiotic relationship they got. The lead belchers, as they're called now, with these big cannons, carry these artillery pieces deep into combat, fueled by the joy and sound of the fury of the cannons. And here's the thing, if cannonballs are not available, they'll use anything around. Rocks, scrap, wood, anything they can jam inside the barrel will get fired upon the enemy. And it's this kind of like quote-unquote weapon crafting that leaves the Ironweld Arsenal artisans just absolutely horrified at what's going on. Now, one step up from the lead belchers in terms of how big the cannon is, basically, is the Iron Blaster. This is another crude cannon, but its origins are not as clear. Right? It appears as a massive cannon being carried on a crude trailer, which is like their artillery piece, but there are competing stories as to the origins of the war machines, but there's a few things that all ogres agree upon. There was once a race called the Sky Titans, deep in Gutbusters over the place called the Scabrous Sprawl. At some point, the Sky Titans fell. Now, there's different accounts by whether Gorkamorka tore it down or there was some other threat, and these cannons were looted from the crater of the Sky Titans. Likely, my understanding of this, there was a civilization fortified on one of the many floating islands in Gutbusters, or it could be like there were cities in Akshi that had found a way to fly, basically, pre-Carriage and Overlords, and something happened, probably during the Age of Myth, start of the Age of Chaos, and it collapsed, leaving colossal weapons of war strewn everywhere. Regardless of how mythical their origins may be or not, the ogres believe them to be like the weapons of the gods. And while these artillery pieces have dispersed among various Maw tribes, tyrants will pay top dollar to have one in their arsenal. The idea being one shot can tear down a fortress wall or shred an entire enemy flank. And that brings us to the last section of units here, simply called Camp Followers. These are like strange ogres that don't really fit into the greater structure of a Maw tribe or a war glut, but stick with them and fight it with them as allies and friends. Starting off with Fire Bellies. This is one of the more fun entries in the book here, and I absolutely love these. So they don't belong to any specific Maw tribe, but instead, they have their own like priesthood. They see Gorkamorka as the Sun Eater, sort of an evolution of the Maw tribe's religion, and their legend passed down through an oral tradition from one fire belly to another. Basically, the idea is that Gorkamorka at some point tried to eat the sun itself, and as he chewed on it, the searing heat filled his body until the belched out an unimaginable torrent of flame, which then created actually the realm of fire. The idea that this entire realm was made by the burp of Gorkamorka, right? I love those fantastic stories regarding their god. And in their attempts to kind of emulate Gorkamorka in this way, firebellies will ingest incredibly volatile materials and ingredients and bellow out gouts of fire as they burp upon their foes. They are wizards in their own right, capable of channeling the arcane through dangerous and disgusting diets as well. Now, to become a firebelly, you need to first encounter one and kind of become his student. They will go through a series of trials to enter the priesthood, and this includes things like eating fire crystals from Akshi, their hair is all burned away, they cover themselves in tattoos, and for their final trial, they must hunt, kill, and eat a magma droth, which obviously puts them at odds with the fire slayers. And like I said, they don't really belong to any Maw tribe. They are always welcome, right? Ogres all around the realms love to have a firebelly with them. For they are unique in another way, and that is that they have mastered the art of seasoning. They can sprinkle bits of magma droth scales or fire root onto a meal and make it taste amazing. Again, in a society all about food, the guys who know how to use spices reign supreme. Next up are the Maneaters. This is a fun one because there's a lot of models for this. I'm just going to pick one and throw it on the screen. But as I mentioned earlier this week, that has really been driven home in this book is the ogre's ability to work with other races. And no other unit demonstrates this better than the Maneaters. For these younger and brash ogres of any Maw tribe, the taste of adventure and mercenary work is hard to pass up. The term Maneater comes from the Age of Chaos, when the god king Sigmar turned his back on the realms and chaos was ascendant. In the madness, the Maw tribes saw that Gorkamorka, his dealings with Sigmar had collapsed, and it was open season to eat humans again without his wrath. The ogres developed a grisly reputation as Maneaters, a name that the mercenary-minded of their kind still carry to inspire a sense of fear in whoever they deal with. These are ogres that wander the realms in search of food and adventure, wielding a super wide array of weapons. If you guys go look at the models, there's like 6 different Maneater models, if not more. And while they also do not cling to a specific Maw tribe, they are always welcome in every single one of them because of their battle expertise, and mainly because the ogres love to hear a good story. While everyone's eating at night, the Maneaters will tell them tales of all the different crazy places they've been and the adventures they've been on by hiring themselves out as mercenaries, and go into detail about the wandering life of a sellsword in rich narrative detail. And the last unit entry for today are the Gorgers. And this is an interesting one because I had no knowledge of these whatsoever. But there exists a curse among the ogres known as the Empty Belly Curse, an affliction they view as punishment by their god. And it does kind of what it sounds like. An ogre afflicted with this will eat but never be satisfied. Not in the sense that they're always like being hungry, but there's no joy in consuming anything. It all tastes like ash in their mouths, even the choicest cuts of meat. No matter how much they eat, they keep losing weight, becoming these gaunt figures, which is like the polar opposite of everything else in the Army, desperately trying to consume everything to satiate their maddening hunger. So tyrants keep these afflicted ogres, known as Gorgers, once they reach kind of like the full diseased status, outside of the camp. They sit in cages, then they cry and they whimper and they pine for anything to eat. And while they are cursed in the eyes of the tribe, want nothing to do with them, they're still useful. Because what happens is when a battle comes about, they're going to unleash the Gorger upon the enemy to cause as much damage as possible before falling in combat. Because his going nuts and killing things and then trying to eat stuff, and ultimately putting all the focus on the Gorger, just means that the bodies are easier to clean up afterwards for dinner by the actual warglut. They are feral, robbed of reason by hunger, and are discarded just as such. So why is all of this cool, right? First of all, just having lore at last is just awesome. There's just something awesome about having, your favorite units in the story being cool. I love the lead belchers. I have to say the firebellies are my favorite. I had no expectation of that, but the idea of this like priesthood within a very nomadic culture, I thought was really neat to have their own like origin story for Gorkamorka and magics they use. Thought it was really, really cool. In addition to that, the idea of the Gorgers really kind of stuck out to me because it almost reminded me of the flayed ones from Necrons in 40k, where you have this subset of your culture that has a disease that is very hyper specific to your race, but you can't just destroy them, right? You want to keep them off to the side, but also they're useful, so you integrate them in different ways into your society. And I kind of like that. There's a really cool thing there, and this idea that, like, what's the worst thing imaginable to a society built on food is that food not being enjoyable anymore. Like, that is, it breaks you. And I think that's a really interesting, play on disease. But anyway, friends, that will conclude pretty much most of the lore for the Ogre Maw tribes. There's still a few things I want to touch on later on, but we have so many battle tomes coming out that I just want to move on and talk about the Ossiarch Bone Reapers. But let me ask you this. Of the units here, right, these are the Gutbusters and a few, like, hangers-on. What is your favorite? Right, I said mine was the Firebelly for his lore. Tell me what is your favorite in the comments below, and I'll catch up with you there. Thank you so much for watching, and happy wargaming.